everyone. I have the amazing Crystal Haitsma here, and she's a certified life coach. She's obviously an amazing parent coach. Every time I see some of your stuff, or I hear, or I talk with you, I am just like wide-eyed, and I should take notes because I love everything that you talk about. So, and we've had conversations before about some of the deep stuff that maybe we'll get into today. So I'm excited for that. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you. I'm excited too. I had you on my podcast and it was a great conversation and I feel like it was super aligned. And so, yeah, I think this will just be a really good episode.
And no one, like you guys listening, don't know, but we just wasted about 15 minutes chatting
Mm-hmm.
chatting about life and where we're at and what we're doing, and Crystal's traveling and everything. So I was like, okay, we better get down to actually recording the podcast.
Yes, we're traveling full time right now with our family of 6 and it's wild and amazing all at the same time.
Yeah, I can't believe it. That seems so beyond my normal life here. I'm so like vanilla.
Yeah.
So for people who don't know about you or your work, let us know a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah. So, I mean, I am a certified life coach, but I kind of life coach on everything. But parenting has been my jam for the last few years because it was kind of my own story, which I think is a lot of the reasons we get into here, right? We're like, okay, wait, this is actually hard. And for me, I had neurodiverse kids and they were really difficult. Is one in particular, when I was raising him, was really hard. And as I kind of dove more into that hard, I knew about attachment and connection and relationship and all of these things in parenting that I wanted. I had read about them since my kids were toddlers, kind of the very first books that ever came out. My kids are old. My oldest is 17 now. So it was kind of the very beginning of any new information being put out there about parenting. Like it was so new. My parents were actually the ones who introduced me to it because they were still parenting. I come from a very large family. There's 8 of us. So
Oh,
my mom's still parenting her little kids at home, and I'm having my kids also. And my youngest brother is only about 6 years older than my own son. So anyway, so she's parenting, I'm parenting, and she finds Gordon Neufeld's book, Hold On to Your Kids. And she
okay.
says, we parented in like not the best way. We're going to be changing things and we think you probably should too. Just FYI, like we did not really prep you for the kind of parenting that is probably the best. So it was great. My mom ended up going back to school. She got her master's. She's a therapist now, and we do awesome women's retreats together. And it's kind of like the coolest story to come full circle from that. But it got me into this parenting sphere that I then felt like I had this higher pedestal for myself because I learned so much more. I already felt like I was like failing at the lower pedestal I had for myself.
Oh,
And then I was like, okay, now I'm really failing. And I just could not figure it out. And I really think I blamed my child. I think I was like, oh, it's just because of their neurodiversities, of their intricacies. I didn't know, what diagnosis they were going to have at that time. Since then, I have at least one kid with high functioning autism, and we have ADHD and anxiety. So I think that I really thought it was those that made it so difficult to parent. And for sure, it's hard. And for sure, those behaviors are difficult. But a lot of it was just my own response and my own, like how I'm showing up and all of that. Like everything you talk about all the time, like those were all the things that I didn't really see. Right. So it was my own kind of journey, a very, very, very slow growth journey until I felt like things were going okay and our relationship was getting better. And his behavior was like improving by like 90% with no medication and no personal therapy for him of any kind, like no behavioral therapy whatsoever. His meltdowns decreased by like 90% or more in intensity and in frequency. Like we were
whoa.
doing hours every day meltdowns, and they went to like maybe once or twice a month, super minimal. Like it was like crazy effective for us, but really difficult for me, obviously, to kind of do all of this kind of work. But things got to a point where I felt like it was kind of manageable. I decided to go back to school again, planned on doing my master's in therapy, stumbled upon life coaching, which I didn't even know what that was before, found the life coach school. It felt really aligned. And since then, it's just been this huge years of like exponential learning and growth and change, so much more than I even understood before when it came to parenting. Um, and my children are doing like fabulous. I mean, we are traveling the world with neurodiverse kids full time right now, and it is going well.
Uh,
We're in new places with new foods and new like
yeah.
all the things that are pretty big struggles for them. So I would say we're winning at that game so far. If that was a game, it's going really well. And really all of the change that happened was in me. It wasn't in my kids. I mean, the change happened for them as well as a result of, but it wasn't change that I did with them. It was change that I did internally myself.
Whoa. Like, can I just go back to that point? You're traveling the world with your kids, your whole family, and you have,
Mm-hmm.
the challenges of parenting different kids and neurodivergence in there. Like, this
Mm-hmm.
is, I'm just in awe of how you are not like falling in a heap on the floor.
Oh, I sometimes am. You caught me on a good day. No. Um, Actually, when we were in Europe, the first couple of months was really hard. It was a really big transition for me. And I think just like allowing myself to be so much more flexible and really lowering my expectations about how our days would go or whatever. So there was some heaps on the floor moments. And I think about the 2 month hump, I was able to go through that with my own processes on myself and then kind of moved into the space where we feel really good about it and we're really enjoying how it's going. But yeah, there definitely was a lot of
Mm.
those moments on the way here.
A lot of floor moments.
Yes, yes.
So you mentioned something just then about doing your own processes and things like that. And I
Mm-hmm.
know that so now you're in the space of connection based parenting. And
Mm-hmm.
obviously, like we both talk about doing the work, so to speak, on ourselves first, not our
Mm-hmm.
kids, not wishing our kids or trying to change their behavior and things like that. So maybe you can talk about a little bit of what that older, more traditional parenting style was like, moving into the
Mm-hmm.
connection based parenting style. And I know you talk about sort of there are blocks sometimes that we want to
Mm-hmm.
parent from a place of, respectful, connection based, empathy, patience, and things like that, and emotional intelligence. But there are
Mm-hmm.
there are just things that are like, rocks in the river. There are things that are holding us back, and there's this kind of like, yeah, this disconnect. Does that make sense?
Yes. And I see the way that I describe traditional parenting is like coercion. Like it's like, let's focus on this behavior. Let's try to change this behavior because it's all about the behavior. It's like training a dog, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which I think there's got to be better ways to train dogs too. But like how we train dogs, we're like, these are all the behaviors we don't want. These are all the behaviors we do want. Let's see what we can do. Do we spray them in the face? Do we like, smack them on the butt? Like, what do we do? And it's the same thing that we do in parenting. And sometimes we've moved away from like, okay, well, we shouldn't be smacking them, but also we still like metaphorically smack them, right? We're like, well, we're going to stick you in your room for a timeout by yourself, or we're going to yell at you, or we're going to shame you, or we're going to reinforce by, giving you something positive, like a positive reward. Let's, give you more screen time or video games or whatever it is that you want. You can usually uniquely figure out what it is that your kid wants or doesn't want. And that's what you use to pressure them into behavior change. So traditional parenting is all about behavior change. I think modern parenting, like you and I talk about emotional intelligence, connection based parenting, isn't yet the norm. I hope that it will be. I see a movement of people that really want something different than what their parents passed down to them and their parents' parents. And I see that that is more focused on relationship. It's more focused on connection. We still have boundaries, but they are enforced through loving care and guidance and affection. And it's very different energy in our home from that space. So to go all the way from one end to the other end seems like a pretty far jump for us. And then we like read these books and we're like, why isn't this working? But like that's huge. And even consciously, that's huge. But what I love to dig into, I think that the work that I do is a little bit different in that I really love to work on the subconscious level. So I'm like, because I really think that's what was blocking me before that I didn't see. So I won't talk so much about my story, but because mine was a lot more longer and a lot slower because I didn't really know what was happening. But now, from the lens that I know now, I've done a lot of training on shame specifically and on emotions and on subconscious beliefs, like what's happening below the surface. And what I've seen is when we are triggered by anything in our life, it can be our kids or anybody else. A trigger is a strong emotional reaction, a strong emotional activation. There is always a trigger underneath the surface. It's not the thing we think is bothering us,
Mm-hmm.
right? We're like our child's freaking out in Costco. I'll use a Costco example because I have a lot of those to use with my kids. I take them, they hate going grocery shopping. So I take them into Costco, which I miss, by the way, now that we're that we're currently in Malaysia, but take them to Costco. They freak out because they want something that they're not getting or whatever. And my brain starts to freak out also. And I'm like, okay, I know what to do logically, right? Like be calm and present and like bring myself back down to calm and all those things. And I'm like, I cannot get there in this moment. I am feeling so ticked right now. So all I did was I kind of like tuned into, well, what's really triggering me? It's not actually my child on the floor screaming right now, although that seems like it's what's triggering me. When I ask myself questions like, what's really going on behind this for me? What's really bothering me about this behavior? Or my favorite question is, what am I making this mean about me? That always gets to the root of the shame. And then I'm like, ooh, you know what I'm making this mean about me? That not only am I a bad parent, or else they wouldn't respond this way, but also they probably know somehow that I'm a parenting coach. Maybe they listen to my podcast and they've like seen me out there, or they follow me on Instagram and they're like, what is she even talking about? She doesn't even know what she's doing and all of these things, right? Like my brain is our shame brains are very specific. They're very specific at getting to us in the ways that it knows how, right? So it's going to tell us all of the things we're doing wrong. And by shame, I mean not enough, a feeling of like something is wrong with me. Not like guilt as in I did something wrong, but like I am wrong.
I think that's a
So
big separation to make there, because we will have
yeah,
guilty like moments where we feel like guilt and, oh, I shouldn't have done that, or, whatever we've done or said in the heat of the moment. But then the shame is like, because of that, I am a bad person. I'm a bad parent.
yes.
Like so much
And we
more.
go from guilt to shame. Like, I don't even know. I don't think I've ever talked to somebody who has like felt the guilt, but then just allowed the guilt to like move through and process through them and be like, okay, well, I'm just going to go back and, respond well. Like it usually just moves right to shame. And so under the surface, we have these triggers connected to shame, connected to our own worth, value, enoughness, being seen, loved, connected, heard. And that's what really the root of our struggles are. That's what's causing us to have this block between the behavior that we want from ourselves and the behavior that we actually see from ourselves. And that is what I call reparenting. I call it that because that's just a word that people use often, but it really means like uncovering like what is the trigger underneath the surface that usually came from my own childhood. My parents usually didn't respond to my big emotions very well, which makes me feel XYZ. And how can I process through that by giving myself what I need right in this moment? So it's less about my child and it's more about me. It's really only about me. But then as I do that work, then things change with my relationship with my kids. But it's so much more me focused.
Whoa. So is it too reductionistic to say then, if we remove shame and we allow ourselves to feel guilt, but then have some strategies to move on, is that like the big kind of rock, the big block, that shame?
I think the big block is shame, and I haven't quite determined whether or not we can feel healthy guilt. I honestly think that as a society, we've been taught that failure equals shame. Like any
Yeah.
failure, any mistake. I've never once ever processed something through with a client where they were just like, oh, yeah, I see that. I probably shouldn't have done that. I don't feel bad about myself about that. I can just like, like really healthfully come up with this way of like processing and responding to it. And so I think that we have just been from a very young child, and not just from our parents, but from society as a whole, shown that making mistakes means wrongness inside of us, like that there's something inside of us that's wrong. So I think it's so much deeper. I think it's so much deeper than we see, and so much more like all over, that we got it from church and community and society as a whole and our families. And so I would love to go back and do my master's on this. Like, okay, do we actually feel guilt? Like, in what situations do we? Because maybe at the time when we're feeling a little bit more emotionally healthy, we do. I don't know. But even now, I either don't get triggered by something and I get triggered much less frequently, much less intensely. My triggers are so much less. But when I do get triggered, it's still shame. Like I don't anyway, so that's an interesting discussion about guilt and shame. But I think that yes, shame is the thing that is blocking us from being the person we want to be in all areas of our life. This could be at work, this could be in your relationship with your partner, with your kids. Like, so that's why I'm like, yeah, I do parenting coaching sort of, but also like parenting is really just the outcome that you get is that will change, but so will other things. But it's so much more about this like inner work that we
Yeah.
need to do inside of us.
Do you have any stories, maybe from clients or from your own
Mm-hmm.
experiences in your own home or traveling, where you have sensed that guilt or the shame, like, oh, why did we rush to this place and now kids are not coping? Like, what, tell us a story of like what you go through and now how you respond to that feeling of, oh, like I've, my kids have blown up or argued or they're being uncooperative or I'm getting really frustrated. Like, where do you go with that? Whereas compared to, I guess, before
How I
before you
used
knew
to.
about this, yeah, how you used to.
Yeah, I think before I didn't understand that it was inside of me, right? So I would mostly just, there's three different ways you respond to shame. So one is you get more like aggressive, like kind of like, that would be like yelling or screaming or belittling or shaming other people, right? Even if it's not yelling and screaming, it's definitely unkind. It's more of the like aggressive towards somebody. Another way we respond to it is people pleasing. So we just try to make everybody else comfortable, even though we're feeling really uncomfortable. We like take it all on, kind of. And another way is we like shut down and withdraw. And I find that we usually respond in different ways in different situations, right? So if it's like shame that I feel on Instagram because somebody said a comment on my, reels or something like that, I'm usually more of the people pleasing. Like I'll usually try to like make them feel better. Oh no, that's not really what I meant. Oh no, no, no. Like, like just back everything up. Versus if it's like, maybe my extended family, I might be more of a shut down and withdraw. Like that's fine. I'm just not going to think about it. I'm not going to talk about it. Whereas with my children, I would definitely more go to the aggression, even if it
Mm.
wasn't necessarily yelling or screaming. Definitely the shame comes through in our energy, right? So when I'm feeling that way, I actually spread that all around. So it doesn't matter what the decibel level of my voice is, I can be just as cutting in my response and they can feel just as much shame without the yelling, right? It's not so much the yelling. So that's how I would respond. One of those three ways, usually different depending on the situation. And I feel like now I still do. It seems less intense. The trigger itself seems less intense and it seems to happen less frequently. And I just notice it in other areas. Like I noticed it the other day with like money. Like one of my kids wanted something and I like didn't want to say yes and I didn't want to say